does God exist? I mean, it's got to be the biggest question we've ever asked, right? And just recently, this ancient question got a fresh look in a really fascinating debate between Javed Akhtar, the famous poet and rationalist, and Mufti Shamail-SIMPLIFIED, an Islamic scholar. So let's get into it. We're going to break down their arguments piece by piece, not to declare a winner, but to really get our heads around the logic of this timeless debate.
Now, on the surface, sure, it's about belief versus non-belief. But when you really dig into it, this whole thing is about the fundamental rules of reality itself. We're talking about logic, what even counts as proof, and how we can possibly know what's true.
So, in one corner, you've got Mufti Shamail-SIMPLIFIED. He's a scholar, and he's building his case with the tools of philosophy and pure reason. And in the other corner, Javed Akhtar, a celebrated poet who really champions skepticism and demands hard, observable evidence. Two brilliant minds, but they're starting from completely different places. All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll set the stage and look at the rules of the debate. Then we'll jump into the big arguments, the first cause, the problem of evil, and even the tools they use to find truth. And finally, we'll wrap up with the great disagreement at the heart of it all.
Okay, first things first. Before anyone could make a single point, they had to agree on the rules of the game. Like, what kind of evidence is even allowed in a debate like this? It's a super important starting point, and it shapes everything that comes after.
So here's the crucial distinction they had to make. Think of revelation as having the teacher's answer key. You just trust the source, you don't need to show your work. Reason, on the other hand, is like solving the math problem right there on the board for everyone to see and test for themselves. And this is where it gets really interesting. Mufti Nadwi agreed to put the answer key aside and use only reason, making sure both of them were playing by the exact same logical rules.
All right, with the rules set, we get to the absolute cornerstone of the theist's case, the first cause argument. This is an attempt to use nothing but pure logic to prove that a universe like ours absolutely has to have a creator.
The whole thing starts with this one key concept, contingency. And it's actually a pretty simple idea when you break it down. A chair is contingent on a carpenter. A tree is contingent on soil and water and sunlight. Pretty much everything you see didn't just pop into existence on its own. It depends on something else. And this slide right here, this gets to the heart of it. Mufti Nadwi used this exact analogy. Imagine you're on a deserted island and you find a pink beach ball. Your brain immediately thinks, someone made this. Someone brought it here. You would never think it just appeared. So he asks, if a simple ball needs a cause, how could the entire infinitely more complex universe not need one? And boom, there it is, the classic counter-argument. This is the question that Javed Akhtar, and pretty much every skeptic, is going to ask. If you say everything needs a cause, well, you run into a huge problem. An endless chain of creators creating other creators, on and on forever. The philosophical answer to that is captured perfectly by this analogy here. This endless chain of causes is called an infinite regress. And it's like a train with an infinite number of cars, but no engine pulling them. That train would never move, right? The argument is that the fact that we exist proves the train is moving. And if it's moving, there has to be a first, uncaused engine at the very front to get the whole thing started.
Okay, so now the debate takes a turn. We're shifting away from the cold logic of existence to what is, for my money, the atheist's most powerful argument. It's one that's grounded not in abstract thought, but in the very real, very painful reality of suffering.
Javed Akhtar poses this absolutely devastating question. It's the emotional and logical core of his position. He's basically saying that the world we actually see, a world filled with so much pain and cruelty, doesn't seem to match the description of a world made by an all-powerful, all-loving creator.
And he's not just talking in hypotheticals. Akhtar points to the brutal, honest-to-goodness realities of our world. We're talking about war, disease, hunger, and even just the raw, violent fact that in nature, things have to kill each other to survive. He argues that this just doesn't look like the handiwork of a compassionate designer.
So the response from the theist side is to completely reframe the problem. The argument is that evil isn't some design flaw, it's actually a necessary part of a meaningful life. You know, without the choice to do evil, the choice to do good becomes meaningless. This world, in this view, is a test of that choice. And suffering is just part of a bigger plan we can't fully see, one where, eventually, justice will be served. So, you know, beyond these specific arguments about God or evil, the debate really showed a huge crack, a fundamental disagreement about the actual tools we should be using to discover what's true about our reality. Mufti Nadwi brings up this idea of scientism.
And the analogy for it is just perfect. Think of science like a metal detector. It's an amazing tool for finding metal, right? But the fact that it can't find plastic doesn't prove that plastic doesn't exist. He's arguing that if you only use science to look for God, you might just be using the wrong tool for the job.
And this is a really important one, a logical trap that, honestly, both sides need to be careful not to fall into. Saying, well, you can't prove God doesn't exist, so he must exist, that's a fallacy. But so is saying you haven't shown me scientific proof for God, so he must not exist. The absence of evidence isn't always evidence of absence.
So after you weigh all the arguments and counterarguments, you arrive at the real heart of it all, a fundamental clash between two completely different ways of seeing the entire world.
This table lays it all out, side by side, just perfectly. On existence, it's a necessary God versus a necessary universe. On proof, it's a battle between pure logic and the demand for hard evidence. On suffering, you've got a moral test clashing with what looks like a flawed design. And finally, on science, is it a useful tool or is it the only tool? It's a total divide. So, where does that leave us? The debate doesn't really crown a winner, and maybe that's the point. It invites us to think about our own position. But forget a simple yes or no. Think about it like this. What if belief is a dial, a spectrum, from, say, 0 for absolute atheism to 10 for absolute faith? Where would you set your own dial?
Because here's the thing, maybe the biggest takeaway from this whole debate is that for most of us, belief isn't a fixed switch that's just on or off. It's a dial. And that dial can move throughout our lives, right? It can be turned by logic, sure, but also by our experiences, our emotions, and our ongoing search for answers. The real question isn't just where your dial is set today, but what might make it turn tomorrow.